We're live? Hello! Welcome everyone to this talk about the Year 1 transition at Regent International School. My name is Matt Flynn and I'm the Deputy Head of EYFS and Key Stage 1 here. Some of you will be joining this call this afternoon from Facebook, LinkedIn or YouTube, but wherever you're joining the call you can leave comments for any further questions that you have throughout the session today. Now, we've already taken questions from some of you, whether you be existing families who are making that transition from our FS2 provision, or whether you be new families joining us in August this year. But the presentation might have a few gaps for specific questions that you have for your personal situation, which we might be able to get to at the end. So thank you again for joining us, and anything that's not covered, please drop into the comments. So initially, one of the things we'd like to walk you through is the timeline of the Year 1 transition. So if we can switch to that one there. Thank you very much. So before the end of this current academic year, it's important to start talking to the children about the move. Whether you're already in Regent or joining us, like I said earlier, it's something that children need to be prepared for. And some of the questions we're talking about what to do over the summer in terms of making sure that children make a fantastic transition into their Year 1 setting. Now, our perspective at Regent is that most of those things will centre around the individual child themselves and less so much about academic standards. So the items that we've put in here to answer that question, independence, confidence and resilience, are actually things that children are naturally developing at different rates anyway. And over the summer, we want people to be talking to their children about the idea of coming to big school. Children might be buying on uniform. They might have the opportunity to try and visit the school, to do another tour and visit some of the classrooms. If the children are already in Regent, they will have all of those opportunities as part of their day from being in FS2. And they might not necessarily meet their actual teacher, but they will certainly come up to the Year 1 classrooms, look at those spaces, and just see how similar they are to the existing provision that they have in FS2. When it comes to August, that's when things really start to kick into gear and you see some real transition taking place. So the first day of the academic year will be for children to come into school in 3 different groups. Now, all of Year 1 will be invited in for that first day, and the information around this will be sent to you in a letter much closer to the time. But normally what we would do is that children who are new to the school would come together in the morning, a second group of existing students would come together at lunchtime, and a third and final group come in the afternoon. And that gives you as parents the opportunity to meet the child's new teacher, and for the children to see whose class they're going to be in. Most of the information will be sent in August and via email. And for most families, that will be sufficient. But there might be some families who have different needs, who are maybe not in Dubai at the moment. And if you have any further questions about your individual circumstances or potential difference in start dates, contact your admissions lead at Regent and they will be able to advise you specifically on your individual circumstances. Now, again, one of the questions we get asked all the time, and I'll come to it a little bit more in terms of when you're in the school year, but what can you do to prepare your child? Well, be children, first and foremost. Your role as a parent is a tremendously important one in their development. But you will know yourself that sometimes your child may not necessarily want to do the things like homework or reading if it's you compared to their teacher. They, at this age, already know that they have a certain life at home and a certain life at school, with those expectations being quite different at times. And we don't want to discourage children. We don't want children to be coerced or bribed into doing homework or anything like this. So we want you to have opportunities so that you can develop your relationships with your children, that they can visit family members, and they can do the things that children should be doing, essentially. We've got plenty of time in the school year to ensure the academics are sound. So one of the things we've shared here is an example of some suggested activities that could take place for children over a summer vacation. Now, the target audience of this particular list was based in the UK, and depending on where you're spending the summer, there might be some limitations of what you're able to achieve. But again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is the type of things that we would like children to be doing so that they come back to us in August with a range of experiences that have shaped their character, and they can talk about to their friends and their teachers, and then we can use that in terms of how we shape their writing, their knowledge of the world, and their determination to improve as people, okay? So going back to the idea of resilience and independence, these sorts of activities are the traits that we're trying to develop all the time, and the summer's a great place to make a strong start on that. So I've mentioned there again, your role as a parent is incredibly important, as is the community around you. And there are some things in the few weeks leading up to the start of school which you might start to consider tightening up on. And one of those things certainly is a bedtime routine. Most children transition into school with no problems at all. But there are some who take a little bit longer. And normally when dealing with those families, it's something to do with a lack of structure at times or a lack of predictability. Now, we know living in an expat community is perhaps a little bit different to the life you would have had if you'd stayed in the home country. I know that's certainly true for me and my family, but one of the things that makes a huge difference to children's lives is the amount of sleep they get when they're developing at a young age. And to ensure that sleep happens, a solid routine is really, really important for that. Now, obviously, again, when you're traveling in the summer or whether even you're staying in Dubai, you might have more flexibility with that, and there is little consequence the next day if there's a flexibility in the plans. But when children are coming to school and there is a timeline of events for the day, they've got to be up quite early, they've got to then be going from one lesson, that might be with their teacher, to a music lesson, back to their teacher. Being predictable with that environment is something that can really help them settle in with those changes. As some of you have already noticed, the day is slightly longer in Key Stage 1 than FS2, and that means that children tend to need a little bit of time to adapt to that. Now, of course, we consider that at the beginning of the year, and things like extra break times are brought into their day, particularly in September and October, and finding spaces for children to have more opportunities to break up their day into smaller chunks. But as the year goes on, having those foundations of a solid routine at home, adapting to the school life, can really drive progress throughout the year. The QR code that's on the screen there is just one example of lots of information that's out on the internet in terms of routines at home and the importance of sleep. It will vary the guidance that you're given, but particularly at this younger age, they do need larger chunks of sleep so that they can be well rested and ensure that attendance is really high as well. Okay? And attendance is something that I'm going to talk a little bit more about here because we, again, living in an expat community, sometimes struggle with the amount of attendance that a child might achieve, okay? And we're not talking about individual circumstances where there might be illness or an emergency. We're talking a little bit sometimes about the perception of the importance of school. Now, in the UAE, there is Wadima's law from 2016, which states that children need to attend school. You will know in the parents' contract for KHDA, there is a figure of 85% being an absolute minimum of attendance. Anything lower than that could potentially cause a child to be held back a year. That's not a situation we ever want to be in, okay? If there are individual issues with attendance, again, that's something that school can and has supported with in the past. However, attendance is incredibly important for that adaptation, that transition especially, even when it's difficult. The temptation might be to take children home and try again the next day. Unfortunately, in my experience, that doesn't really help the situation longer term, okay? So again, we're probably talking 2 or 3% of children each year need a little bit of extra support with adaptation to a new year group and that transition. But the leaders, including myself and the school and the teachers, are all here to help with that, okay? And please follow the advice that's given, because historically, that's normally the thing that makes the transition tighter and smoother than expanding it into we'll try again tomorrow, we'll try again tomorrow. That doesn't tend to be as smooth as possible, okay? Likewise, the question that most teachers will get asked the most, and certainly we get asked quite a lot on duty and in tours, is what can I do to help my child? And that's why most people are parents, they want to help their child develop, and always the answer will be reading. Reading is the thing that you can significantly have an impact on. It might not even be your child reading to you. It could be you modeling that you are reading. They could be reading with a friend or a brother or a sister or a relative. They could be reading by themselves. It doesn't have to be out loud. And it's the sort of thing which is really accessible, whether you join the library in Dubai and go visit there, or whether you are going through books and perhaps even going to secondhand sales like Baby Bazaar or something, and buying books cheap and selling books. Coming to the libraries in the school, obviously, which is where we are now. Reading is the number one thing that can make a huge difference, particularly when children are younger. And you'll see, again, there's lots of statistics and different groups of people will have put together different data on this. The snip here is from an accelerated reader, which is one of the programs that is used at Regent, but across lots of schools around the world. And it's giving you some ideas there of how much per minutes a day can add up over time, and the difference that reading can make to a child's performance in academia as well. Okay. Now, one of the most common questions in transition times is, what does it look like when it's successful? How do I know that it's working? And in a second, we'll talk through some strategies and questions that you can ask your children to check in a non-intrusive way around that. But one of the things we talk to parents about quite a lot is sometimes taking a step back and looking at the progress that has already been made. When there's periods of frustration, it can be quite difficult to kind of see progress that has occurred already, and instead you'd be looking for future progress and future changes that would maybe solve a problem. Now, the wonderful thing about children is that they're all different, but it's also sometimes a problem. So what we need to do particularly is follow the children's path here, and we respond to their needs. We look out for changes that are positive, we build relationships, we put in structure, and we make sure that the child is supported, but also the parents are supported in that situation. And some of the time, that's probably the most significant we can do, is to look after the parents as well. And here are some examples of questions. So if you are looking for a problem, you will find it. And if you're asking questions that are on the left-hand side of your screen there in the orange color, they are likely to lead to something being reported that may or may not be so significant. If you can steer yourself towards the questions in the blue column, which are a lot more open and less leading, it's likely that your child can give you a more in-depth answer, and you can find something which is positive as well as something that could possibly be improved. And that's useful for you as a parent to remind and reassure your child that not all is bad. Change is difficult. Change is difficult whether you're young or old. Change takes time, and it's something that should be encouraged and nurtured. It's not something that is to be avoided, especially joining a school. Something like that doesn't necessarily help a child for avoiding dealing with those situations. So being honest with children is really important, asking them how they're feeling, celebrating success and making sure that that is identified is all going to be such a huge part of a successful transition. So a few questions about the structure of the day. And as we briefly mentioned earlier, the length of the day is longer in year 1 than it is traditionally at FS2 at Regent anyway. So you'll notice on the timetable there's a couple of additional subjects, and some of the questions were around which languages were taught. Arabic continues to be taught, but is extended in the time period. And from year 1 upwards, French is offered for children. And currently, that is the only language additional to the Arabic, and the language of instruction being English, that is offered as part of the curriculum here. But if there's any changes in the future with that, you will of course be notified. We do have over 80 nationalities of children here and a really diverse background. So we are also well aware that families want to maintain the mother tongue and keep developing the home language as much as possible. So there are a few differences in the length of the lessons as well, which are probably going to be changed next year compared to this year, okay? So the length of the lessons for specialists will increase slightly for music and PE, where this year they are, at the minute, slightly less. They're 40 minutes. Next year should go up to an hour for PE and an hour and a half for music for year 1, okay? So something different compared to what we've talked about previously in these meetings last year and the year before for sure is sharing more information about the end of year expectation. And all children in year 1 in UK curriculum will complete a phonics screening test. And as you can see on the slide there, the pass mark being 80% is quite a significant development in terms of a child being this age and having to hit such high standards. But at Regent, around 92% of children will hit that mark if they've been with us all the way through. Children joining us at the beginning of year 1, depending on their background, will certainly make progress towards that, but it might be the case that they would pass that screening in year 2 rather than in year 1, depending on the length of time that they spent with us. But most children will hit at least 80% of that phonics screening mark. And again, reinforces the importance of reading, whether it be practicing tricky words at home or getting into the banded books that are coming back from the library. Those skills are constantly developed in school with daily phonics sessions, and it's a really important benchmark for children to hit at a young age to set themselves up for future developments. And you can see the exhaustive list of objectives for a child must be able to do with a reading task and comprehend different things. Most of those things need to be achieved for a child to be considered expected at the end of the year 1. Now, writing is a little bit different for the UK curriculum, and the examples on your screen here are all examples of children that are considered to be working at the expected standard, so age-related expectations of year 1. And I've put them on a small continuum here for you to see that there is a lower threshold and an upper threshold of what that expected standard looks like. Now, there is some importance given to things like spelling and letter formation and handwriting. However, content is equally as important here, and the development of ideas. So although all of these examples would be considered expected, you can see the example in the upper threshold doesn't necessarily have a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence. However, the example in the middle of the average does, even though the spelling of the word once is incorrect. So it is something that teachers spend an incredible amount of time assessing, particularly to ensure it's as accurate as possible. And we use a system that is used again across UK curriculum schools across the world, where there are tens of thousands of year 1 students compared against each other to give the most accurate judgments as possible. And by doing that, that really helps us plan next steps for children's journeys in writing. Maths is different again, and the way that the maths and the science curriculum works particularly are more kind of topic-based, in the sense that a lot of the number work that takes place from August through to middle of March, April, will be a huge part of the maths curriculum in any year group. But of course there are other aspects to maths, such as the volume and capacity, which year 3 are learning this week, looking at things like area and perimeter. But in year 1, lots of the concepts are introduced in a practical manner. So children get hands-on experience. They are using concrete items. So when it comes to looking at capacity and volume, they are picking up containers and measuring using standard units and non-standard units. When it comes to learning about the time, of course, they each get a clock and they get the chance to move and talk about minutes and hours and look at their hands. It's not something that children are expected to learn and recall instantly at this age, but it's items like that on the maths agenda that are taught and covered certainly. So there are lots of ways in which the school will stay in touch, and if you're an existing member of the Regent community, you will know in FS2 you get to drop off to the door and pick up from the door each day. That's slightly different in year 1. One of the things about developing their independence is we expect them to be able to walk to school certainly after the first couple of weeks, walk into school by themselves and up to their class. Now, of course, there are adults dotted along that journey for them to support them if they needed. But one of the big differences is that morning drop-off is much quicker. And as soon as the children are in, they are straight into learning, completing morning challenges and activities before the main lessons start at 8 a.m. However, you will get the chance to speak to the teacher at the end of each day at pickup time, which happens in the multipurpose hall 1. That is an opportunity where we prefer communication to be face-to-face. And again, we may have situations where families are working, but if we can, particularly if there's something that requires a little bit more attention, communicate in a face-to-face manner to make sure that we resolve anything that props up throughout the year in a timely manner, okay? It might be that Seesaw or email is used to identify a time where you can meet or perhaps have a phone call, but our preferred method is always going to be a live interaction. We don't want to get into any kind of email correspondence that develops into a chain and doesn't resolve the issue quickly enough. Particularly for the younger children, we want to resolve any issues as soon as possible and work with their families for the best development of the child. And a couple of individual questions which didn't naturally lend themselves into the main presentation here. I'll answer the groupings one first because it leads more on to what we previously discussed. The groupings, currently there are 7 FS2 classes and we're expecting 7 Year 1 classes in the next academic year. However, not all groups will stay the same. It's likely that after speaking to Miss Leslie that we will put together a model where children's teachers choose friendship groups, which could be groups of 4 or 6 or possibly 10 depending on each individual class, that we will consider those as the first priority of making sure that children are with somebody that they have a developed relationship with, that they are happy to come to school with. But we live in a transient place, and what we found over the past few years particularly is that giving children opportunities to develop much broader relationships across a larger group of children is something that can really develop confidence and self-esteem. Okay, so we give them a protected environment in the sense that they've got their closest friends with them, but giving them access to a much broader range of social experiences by making sure the groups are well balanced each year in terms of demographic of where children come from, friendship groups, sure, behaviour is important, and making sure that each group is a balanced group as possible for children to thrive. Now, the other question is particularly common as there are different curriculum offers available in the UAE and particularly Dubai. And depending on the IB curriculum school your child might be attending in the future, the answer might vary slightly. However, the Year 1 curriculum, and particularly the curriculum we offer at Regent International School, is interwoven with critical thinking, which is a key component of the IB curriculum in terms of encouraging children to be inquirers and critical thinkers and to develop responses and solutions to problems that we may not even know about yet. There's never been an issue that we're aware of a child transferring from a British curriculum to an IB curriculum, certainly. And we know that in some countries that an IB curriculum is required at a certain age range to ensure an entry into a university or higher level of education at a certain point. So it's not a situation that is uncommon. But again, for your individual circumstances, it might be worth having a discussion with either one of the admissions team or coming to speak to myself or one of the other leaders about what that timeline looks like to make sure we can get the right situation for you, your child and your family. Okay. So one of the questions is the timing. So the drop-off time, the school is open from 7:15 in the morning and the 30-minute window to drop off ends at 7:45. So as long as your child is here in the gates at 7:45, they will be marked present and in school. We have a lot of children and a small site, so the 30-minute window is the opportunity to drop off. Anybody in after 7:45 will be marked late. Okay, so if their children are coming at 7:15, it's straight into work. There's activities for them to be getting on with in their classroom. Similar to FS2, they'll have provision where there's opportunities for children to be drawing, having construction, role play. But morning work begins in a more formal manner after the first month or so, where children will be maybe completing some practice phonics work independently. They might be doing some additional maths sums work or some independent reading with some additional adults. So children who are able to get in earlier do make use of that time as well, but 7:45 is the last time you can come into school. And yeah, I hope that anybody who's been on the call this afternoon can get a copy of the presentation. I think if you've signed up already, it will be sent out to you also. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions coming in from you, the viewers, this afternoon. But it looks like we might have covered most of the content required from us. As we shared on that initial timeline, if you're new to Regent and you are in Dubai, you are more than welcome to arrange a tour towards the end of May or beginning of June, especially if your child hasn't been on site. We'd recommend doing that. Otherwise, there's not much else to do at the minute other than maybe consider planning some of those activities, getting into good habits and routines with reading particularly, and considering how you can start preparing your child for the idea of moving up to year 1 at Regent. August comes around and partake in those transition days particularly, and get yourself involved in the sessions as well. Unfortunately, no, there is no chance that the school starts at 8:30 at the minute. I've been here 8 years. It's always been this early start, early finish. So that's not something that is being considered at this time, unfortunately. I know there are a few schools who are starting later these days, but that's not something we've considered. So the class setting. So yeah, the approach to the teaching and the classroom itself, very similar in year 1 to FS2. We have the continuous and enhanced provision activities in the classroom all year, and they continue also into year 2. That approach is tailored to the age of the children. So as the children enter year 2, and certainly this time of year in year 2, it does tend to get a little bit more formalized into what you'd maybe be used to experiencing yourself. But there are still elements of, like we said earlier, the role play, the construction, the creative areas. They are in every classroom in year 1 and year 2, and will always be like that here. Yeah. How can we encourage homework? Definitely not bribery. I think homework is something which is a contentious thing. It's something which, again, children don't always want to do with parents, and that's something I'm looking forward to with my own children. Homework is normally rewarded by the teachers, and normally the best strategy with homework is that the teachers give it credit, the teachers give it rewards, so kind of stickers and dojos, and celebrate it in the class. For most children, that's going to intrinsically motivate them. And sometimes parents kind of leverage that a little bit and come and speak to the teacher with their child present, and to say, we're excited to do the homework, and kind of model that idea. Or it might be that parents choose to go the other way and say, I'm struggling to motivate them, any ideas? Or just to make the teacher aware. I think there are lots of times where, as parents, you can use the relationship that your child has with their teacher, okay? And it can be done in a positive way. It doesn't always have to be a negative way. I had a conversation with a parent at drop-off a few days ago where they were unhappy with their child's behaviour at home, and they said if it carried on, they would come and speak to their teacher and myself, and they noted that the behaviour stopped quite quickly. That's not necessarily maybe the preferred approach from most parents, but at the same time, it is obviously something that was useful for that parent in that moment. I think that kind of approach is usually a short-term one. And if we're looking to manage something in a positive way, again, just going into the drop-off situation or pick-up time in year 1, showing an interest in the homework, giving it value, usually helps. You know, what we don't want to have is a situation where children aren't enjoying doing the homework, it's a struggle for parents, it's taking more than 30 minutes, particularly for something like spelling. There are lots of ways of positively managing that experience for everyone. And usually, again, that relationship that the child has harnessed with the class teacher is a really good way in for that. There are a couple of squads for year one. They are mostly development squads for the squads that begin proper in year three. So those two that we have existing at the minute would be the swimming development squad and the Little Limelights, the performing arts development squad. Year one, we find particularly in that first few months, we don't want to put too much pressure on their day. We know we're going from a 1 p.m. finish to a 2:30, 2:40 finish. It's something which we need to manage carefully. Again, expat community, you tend to have a longer summer where there's less structure. It's not uncommon in those first few weeks for children in year one to fall asleep in the afternoon. So we don't want to extend their day too much too soon. And typically the offering increases in year two and then significantly so in year three for ECAs and squads, so that we are trying to find that, again, that balance of opportunity, but also perhaps realism in a child's development. Can kids change their sports house? I don't know. I've not been asked that question before, I don't think. It's not something that normally happens. But again, you're more than welcome to come in and have a conversation about that to see if something can be done there. It's something that when new children join the school, they are allocated each year. And I know we try and keep the numbers fairly balanced. So when it comes to inter-house competitions and things like sports days, we've got a fair representation across the houses. But yeah, please come in and have a chat about that. Let's see what we can do for that one. So yeah, school day finishes at 2:40 is when the parents are allowed into MPH1 to pick up. That last 10 minutes of the day from 2:30 to 2:40 is when we're gathering in MPH1 so that we can be ready for a prompt finish to the day. The only difference would be Friday, which would finish at 11:45 a.m. But Monday to Thursday, the school day will end at 2:40. So if you're already in the school, the class teachers will have the first responsibility of grouping the children to make sure that they're with friendship groups. Now is a fantastic time to speak to your child's class teacher. We do try and take requests for friendships particularly. What we're not able to do is take requests for a particular teacher, which we sometimes get asked for, but friendship groups is really important thing for us in any transition, any change. So if you're currently in Regent, speak to your current FS2 teacher over the next couple of days and or send them a message on Seesaw just to see what kind of groupings the children are likely to be in, or ask for a particular group of children. That's something which does happen quite regularly here, and again, we do our absolute best to make sure it happens because the friendships are particularly important. But yeah, that would be the steps to take there. I think we're done. Thank you for the additional questions at the end there. It kept me busy for a few extra minutes. Like I said before we started those extra questions, depending on whether you're an existing family or a new family to Regent, your next steps might be slightly different. We will have more information over the next few weeks in terms of the timeline of August and the groupings that the children will be in. But if you do have any further questions before then, either speak to your admissions contact or come and see us in the morning or afternoon at your pickup times. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and looking forward to seeing you all very soon.